Just minutes ago, J.D. Vance exploded in fury, unleashing a brutal takedown of UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. A clash so raw, so unscripted, it's shaking Washington and Westminster at the same time. The political world has been rocked once again, and this time, the shockwaves come from across the Atlantic. Just minutes ago, a dramatic moment unfolded that is already reverberating through Washington and Westminster. J.D. Vance, the newly appointed Vice President of the United States, erupted in fury at Keir Starmer, delivering a brutal and unsparing takedown after what he described as shocking and disgraceful remarks from the British Prime Minister. This wasn't the polished language of careful diplomacy. It was raw, emotional, completely unscripted. The words of a man who felt personally insulted and was determined to fire back with full force. To grasp the true weight of this confrontation, we need to step back and understand why J.D. Vance's words matter so much. Recently elevated to one of the most powerful offices in the world, Vance is no ordinary politician. His rise has been nothing short of meteoric, fueled by a reputation for authenticity and a voice that resonates with millions of Americans who feel ignored by the establishment. He doesn't speak in sound bites. He doesn't sugarcoat. He speaks like someone who has lived through struggle and who refuses to play the old political games. And that authenticity is exactly what made his furious response to Starmer all the more devastating. The outburst against Keir Starmer was nothing short of explosive. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't polished by advisors. It was J.D. Vance, raw, unfiltered, and speaking straight from the heart. And it left Starmer reeling. Eyewitnesses say Vance's fury was sparked by remarks Starmer had made earlier in the day, remarks widely seen in Washington as a thinly veiled swipe at the Trump-Vance administration. In his calm, lawyerly tone, Starmer suggested that American politics had lost sight of international cooperation and had turned its back on global responsibility. But what Starmer likely meant as a subtle rebuke, Vance took as a direct insult, not only to the administration he serves, but to the American people who voted for it. And in that moment, the normally composed vice president unleashed a storm. He accused Starmer of sheer hypocrisy, pointing to Britain's own crises, record immigration, crumbling public services, and unrest on the streets. Then came the line already replayed on every network, that Keir Starmer had no moral authority to lecture anyone, and that Britain should fix its own house before dictating to others. The room fell into stunned silence, then erupted in gasps. A rare spectacle, and one that will echo far beyond this moment. A sitting American leader publicly humiliating a British Prime Minister with such brutal candor. This was unprecedented. But J.D. Vance did not stop there. His tone sharpened, his words cut deeper, as he accused Keir Starmer of being completely out of touch with ordinary people. You sit in London, far removed from the struggles of working men and women in your country, Vance declared, his voice rising with passion. You speak of values, but you ignore the voices of your own citizens who are crying out for change. Those words stung, because they echoed what so many in Britain were already whispering. For months, millions have questioned whether Starmer truly represents them, or whether he has become just another polished figure at the top, more concerned with pleasing international elites than serving the people who put him in power. And in that moment, J.D. Vance did something extraordinary. He didn't just confront Starmer. He gave voice to the frustrations of millions of Britons. Viewers at home described a jolt of recognition, as though Vance had finally said aloud what they had long been thinking, but had no platform to express. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the clash went viral. Hashtags trended worldwide. To some, Vance became a truth-teller, unafraid to call out hypocrisy in Britain's leadership. To others, he was reckless, even dangerous, risking a diplomatic rift between two of the world's closest allies. But one thing is certain, this was a turning point. For the first time in years, a senior American leader hadn't just whispered criticism behind closed doors. He had said it openly, boldly, and in front of the entire world. Disagreed with a British Prime Minister. He has erupted publicly, emotionally, and without restraint. And in doing so, he has exposed the fragile state of the so-called special relationship. The reaction from Starmer's camp has so far been muted. His spokespeople issued only a short statement, defending his remarks as measured and focused on international cooperation, insisting he stands by his words. But insiders reveal a different story. Behind the scenes, there is deep unease. Starmer is already under mounting pressure at home, his government battered by the rising cost of living, bitter rifts within the Labour Party, and an electorate that is growing restless by the day. To now find himself in a public feud with the Vice President of the United States only compounds the sense that his leadership is wobbling. And here lies the real drama that makes this moment so explosive. J.D. Vance, in just a few sentences, managed to achieve what opposition leaders in Britain have struggled to do for months. He exposed Starmer's vulnerabilities on the world stage. He made him look weak, isolated, and unable to respond with strength. In politics, appearances matter as much as substance. And tonight, the appearance is devastating for Number 10. This eruption will not fade quietly. It will fuel debates in Parliament, ignite fury across social media, and dominate headlines for days to come. More importantly, it will force the British public to ask an uncomfortable question. If their Prime Minister cannot stand tall against Washington, how can he stand tall for Britain? Unreliable on the world stage. Vance's words cut deeper because they tapped into a long-running frustration among both British voters and international observers. That Keir Starmer often projects himself as a steady, principled leader, yet time and again bends with the political winds. On Brexit, he shifted from die-hard Remainer to reluctant respecter of the referendum. On policing, his rhetoric has veered from tough-on-crime pledges to appeasing activist wings of his party. On freedom of speech, critics note he praises open debate while backing laws that critics say silence dissent. By dragging these inconsistencies into the spotlight, J.D. Vance wasn't just delivering an emotional outburst. He was laying out a damning case that Starmer cannot be trusted. And that charge, coming from America's vice president, lands like a hammer blow. In one fiery moment, Vance reframed the debate around Starmer's leadership not as a question of competence, but of credibility. If Britain's own leader cannot hold a consistent line on the defining issues of his time, why should allies or adversaries take him seriously? The confrontation has left Westminster reeling. Opposition MPs are seizing on Vance's attack as evidence of Starmer's weakness abroad, while Labour loyalists scramble to contain the fallout. But beyond the halls of Parliament, the reaction is far more telling. Across Britain, millions are now asking themselves whether J.D. Vance, an American vice president, has said what many of them have long suspected, that their prime minister is a man who bends, not leads. And this is where the story turns dangerous for Starmer. Because once that perception takes root, that he is not a leader of conviction, but a politician of convenience, it becomes nearly impossible to shake. And that was perhaps the most devastating part of J.D. Vance's eruption. It was not just an attack on Keir Starmer's politics. It was a challenge to Britain's very sense of itself. By framing Starmer as a man who governs by calculation rather than conviction, Vance painted a picture of a Britain drifting, losing the grit and defiance that once defined it on the world stage. For many ordinary Britons watching, that critique landed with brutal force, because it tapped into something they already felt but rarely heard said aloud, that the country has grown weaker, more timid, and less confident under Starmer's leadership. Within hours, the confrontation had spilled far beyond Washington. British media seized on the clash with explosive headlines. J.D. Vance shreds Starmer in global showdown. Special relationship in crisis. Humiliation on the world stage. On social media, clips of Vance's fiery rebuke were shared millions of times, often paired with commentary from frustrated voters asking why it took an American vice president to articulate what they had been feeling for months. Meanwhile, Westminster was rattled. Tory MPs called the eruption proof that Starmer had lost respect abroad, while Reform UK's Nigel Farage wasted no time declaring that the Prime Minister had reduced Britain to a global laughingstock. Even within Labour's own ranks, whispers grew louder. some MPs privately admitting that Vance had struck a nerve, exposing a vulnerability that could not be spun away. For Starmer, the timing could not be worse. Already besieged by domestic crises, economic pressures, and sliding public approval, he now faces the perception that Britain is being openly dismissed by its closest ally. And in politics, perception often becomes reality. The coming days will be critical. Will Starmer attempt to push back forcefully, risking further escalation with Washington? Or will he retreat into cautious diplomacy, hoping the storm blows over, only to confirm the very image of weakness Vance accused him of? One thing is clear. This was more than a diplomatic spat. It was a moment that shook both nations. A collision of two political worlds, one polished, careful, and establishment, the other raw, confrontational, and unapologetically populist. And the question now looming over Britain is whether its prime minister can survive the fallout. Will Starmer respond with clarity, strength, and conviction? Or will he retreat into the safety of vague statements and scripted diplomacy? That is the test now before him. Because once a leader's credibility is openly challenged, silence can be as damaging as the criticism itself. Already, the aftermath is unfolding. Political panels in both Washington and London are framing Vance's eruption as a defining moment. In the U.S., commentators praise the vice president's willingness to speak unfiltered truth, while in Britain, the narrative is far more brutal. Has the prime minister lost the respect of Britain's most vital ally? And this is where the danger for Starmer truly lies. The criticism did not come from an opposition MP, nor from a hostile newspaper. It came from America's vice president, on the global stage, in full view of allies and rivals alike. For authoritarian states watching closely, China, Russia, Iran, moments like this are interpreted as weakness, as cracks in the Western alliance that can be exploited. The symbolism is powerful. A British prime minister, challenged openly and fiercely by an American leader, with no immediate comeback strong enough to repair the blow. Such imagery lingers. It reshapes perceptions not just of Starmer as an individual, but of Britain as a nation. And here lies the central question. Can Starmer seize back control of the narrative, or has J.D. Vance permanently redefined how the world sees him? In politics, power is perception, and perception, once shattered, is nearly impossible to rebuild. For J.D. Vance, the moment has already elevated him beyond the traditional role of a vice president. In one fiery exchange, he showed that he is not simply the second man in Washington, but a leader capable of reshaping global narratives. His eruption has drawn a clear contrast between two styles of leadership, one defined by raw conviction and unapologetic candor, the other by caution, calculation, and compromise. The question now is which style the public hungers for most. Around kitchen tables in Ohio, as much as in Manchester, voters are asking themselves, who speaks for us? Is it the polished prime minister who talks of global cooperation while struggling to unite his own country, or the unfiltered vice president who speaks bluntly and risks offense in the name of honesty? This clash was not just about diplomacy. It was about identity, authenticity, and the future of politics itself. For decades, Western leaders have leaned on diplomacy's careful dance, on scripted reassurances, and on the strength of tradition. But Vance's eruption exposed the fragility of that approach in today's climate, where anger simmers just beneath the surface of everyday life. And now, the stakes are monumental. If Starmer cannot answer with vision and conviction, he risks confirming the very accusations hurled against him, that he's a leader out of touch, unable to embody the spirit of a nation in turmoil. If Vance continues to channel authenticity in moments like this, his influence will only grow, both at home and abroad. This confrontation may well be remembered not as an isolated outburst, but as the beginning of a new political reality, one in which the battle for hearts and minds is fought less in carefully managed statements, and more in the unfiltered eruptions that cut straight to the core of public frustration. For J.D. Vance, his eruption has already secured its place as one of the most unforgettable confrontations in modern political memory, a moment where passion collided with politics in a way no one could ignore. And as the dust settles, one truth remains undeniable. The world is watching. Every word, every action, every response from here on will matter, because leadership, in the end, is not about avoiding eruptions, it is about withstanding them. For Keir Starmer, this is far more than a passing clash. It is a test of character, a challenge to prove whether he can rise above doubt and criticism, or whether his image will continue to crumble under the weight of inconsistency. For the people watching, both in Britain and across the Atlantic, this confrontation is not just about two politicians trading blows. It is about trust, identity, and the kind of leadership needed to guide nations through uncertain times. J.D. Vance may have spoken with fire, but the embers of his words now burn in the hearts of millions, sparking debate and stirring emotions that will not be easily silenced. And so the question remains, will Starmer meet this challenge head-on with clarity and courage? Or will history remember Vance's eruption as the moment that exposed a weakness too deep to repair? The stage is set. The world is watching. And the answer will shape not only Starmer's legacy, but the very direction of Britain itself. Because in politics, moments like these are never just words. They are turning points. And this one, ignited by J.D. Vance's eruption, may echo for years to come.